At the 2015 Deck Expo in Chicago, Prep to Finish presented an accreditation class for the American Institute of Architects. The topic of the presentation was exterior deck rail systems. It seems like people, architects in particular, maybe started getting away from the traditional wooden top rail, wooden bottom rail, wooden spindle system for obvious reasons. You know, it's high maintenance. There is a pretty high rot factor with the all wooden system. You know, everybody seems to still want that top handpiece that you're going to touch the most to be wood. We kind of observe the patterns of, all right, you got one type that's totally custom built and custom designed, custom built, custom finished, powder coated, so that would be the system on the left. The historical DTM would have been oil-based. The new generation of them in the past 5 years, very readily available from most of the major paint manufacturers like Sherwin-Williams or Benjamin Moore. You can get water-based DTMs with rust inhibitives, which is what we prefer as the guys who apply these types of things. Because when you do this type of finish at a practical level like we would, you can brush them or you can spray them. So the easier they are to work with in terms of setup and the off-gassing that they create, the cleanup of equipment after you've done, absolutely prefer water-based, and especially now that they don't rust. So that's kind of what's going on there. Two basic characteristics of this type of system. It's highly custom. By that we mean literally it's another case where you're not going to go online and send the dimensions and order this system. This has to be custom made, usually locally. And this particular one came out of a cabinet shop that we work with a lot. So, you know, one week the guy's building heavily ornamented custom interior built-ins and kitchen cabinets. Next week he's putting together this type of a system. We would refer to this as cabinet grade exterior work, which, you know, at that level and at that cost, that's the expectation. So as far as, you know, who would you talk to, where would you find this level of work? You would find your local cabinet maker who's interested in exterior architectural features and commission him to build this system. So cabinet grade is a phrase that we would associate with this level of work. Material selection, kind of circling back to where we started in the discussion about wood, this happens to be mahogany, which is probably the best choice for, you know, it was intended to be paint grade from the start. From the day this was designed, it was definitely intended to be paint grade. Well, mahogany usually isn't a wood that is chosen on a large scale to be painted for obvious reasons. It's beautiful, it's expensive, you know, why would you cover it with paint? In this particular case, it's because they wanted to choose a species that could live on that house and not rot like the previous one did. So mahogany is harder than cedar, and in most markets it seems it's not that much more expensive than cedar. Mahogany, you know, because not many people paint it on a large scale, not many people know a lot about how to paint it. The finishing side of the discussion begins with where do we want the cabinet maker, the woodworker, or the carpenter to leave off, and where does he want us to pick it up. Whether it's carpentry in the field or custom, you know, cabinet grade like this, we try to keep carpenters not going much higher than 100 grit when they leave off and hand something off to us. They can do their final kind of shaping and crafting and get things to a cleaned up level of sanding before handing off to us, and we usually stop them by about 100 grit. Why would you want to pre-finish something like this? It's got to be finished, and it's a lot easier to do it in a controlled environment like a shop than to do it in the field. Because, you know, this stuff literally was sourced to be worked with in like an 8 to 10% moisture content. So it's, you know, it's coming to us relatively dry. If it were to go out and get installed and start to go through weather sequences, getting rained on and wet and dry and sun and wind and everything, that moisture content would start to go a little berserk before we had a chance to kind of lock it in. So, you know, that's sort of the concept. The other very practical reason why you would pre-finish it is because if it had gone out into the field and gotten installed, we could park 3 painters on that thing with brushes for days. Literally, to 3-coat a system like that, primer, 2 coats of paint with brushes in the field, cost prohibitive. So, worth the extra effort to transport and, the time in advance of installation to put it through the pre-finishing sequence, because we spray them. And in our company, Todd's the resident expert sprayer. The reasons for spraying would be what?
Well, the first part is you're going to get a much heavier coating by spraying. You're going to be able to move faster, be more efficient in it. One of the features that spraying gives us that brushing doesn't is right where your spindle meets your bottom rail, for example, is a high wear area where moisture and everything's going to try to sit. The original rail system was completely flat, both bottom rail and top. It's hard to tell here, but they beveled both the bottom up to the spindles as well as the top cap for your hand to try to get water to go away. But being able to spray, I can get a heavier coat on there. My primer can be super heavy if I need to. We showed you this is a different rail system on the right. This needed to be Essex green. So we did a tinted primer 1 shade lighter so we could gain as we went. That was also mahogany. It was a real light blonde mahogany that needed to get dark green. We wanted to get there faster. If we had done it white, we probably would have had to paint 3 coats of paint over the white. By going with a tinted primer, we sprayed the tinted, sprayed a coat of paint, and then brushed 1 coat in the field. So the spraying was the easy part here. This was like set up, boom, done in an hour. It took me longer to clean the sprayer. But to make it be that cabinet grade quality Scott was talking about, it's going to take a lot of hand work, both with power tools as well as hand sanding to go between coats, just to make it that aesthetic quality people are after. They don't want that to be a rough system. They want it to be nice. They want it to feel smooth because they're going to go show that off to their friends. And everybody that walks up to a rail system, no one walks up and goes, ooh. They put their hands on it immediately. So it needs to be smooth. It needs to be soft to the touch. And it needs to be aesthetically pleasing to the eye. By spraying it, I can get there faster.
And I'm glad you asked that, because one of the other relevant points to what we're talking about right here is the product selection. And probably somebody in this room is wondering, well, if it was mahogany, you said you primed it with a water-based primer. Why would you choose a water-based primer on mahogany? And there's a couple reasons for that. Mahogany doesn't have the tannin bleed that like a cedar does. Cedar would be different. We would probably oil prime cedar because of the bleed factor. We'd want to block out the tannin bleed. Mahogany doesn't bleed that way, so that's reason number 1. So when we have a wood species that won't do that to us, cause bleed through, especially with a white's highly susceptible to that, we'll choose a waterborne because it's more flexible. The amount of movement when this system gets installed out in the weather, you get the verticals and the horizontals all doing their expansion and contraction at the same time. The primer is the bond coat of the wood, and the waterborne latex primers are more flexible than the oil primers. So if the primer can flex with all that movement, which a latex primer can, better than an oil primer, that's a reason to choose it, because if that bond coat is going to flex and move instead of cracking. Oil is a more brittle coat. It will crack. And once that base layer cracks, it's opening up the rest of the 3-coat system to exposure. Just to give you an idea on these sprayed coats that we're talking about, when you saw in the previous slide, Todd was spraying the tinted primer. The sprayed coat, the thickness of that coat is probably the equivalent of 3 or 4 brush coats. You can put so much more on when you spray, which, and the adhesion factor on these latex primers that we're talking about, I mean, we've done a lot of extensive testing on what they're capable of. And you can put these things on, and 6 hours later, you can't scrape them off.
It's hard to scrape, but you're getting a 3 to 3.5 mil coating in spraying, where you're talking about some serious brushwork to get that amount of paint in.
Yeah.
Clear systems. The next beast out there that we deal with a lot, we probably deal with this on a lot of the houses we work on more than anything, is people want to see the beautiful wood. This is mahogany. We went through, sanded it all out to 180 grit, and then brushed multiple coats of urethane onto it to seal it really well. It was 5 years before we had to go and do any maintenance on the rail system, which was nice. And to this day, we haven't had to touch the powder coat system. You know, guys will tell you, just scuff sand it and re-oil, it'll be fine. If it's in the state that we were looking at earlier, guys, like that, do yourself a favor, take it to wood. Get it down, because in the end, going that little extra distance at that point is you're gonna win in the end. You're gonna be so far ahead, you know?
The thing to keep in mind, nothing here is anywhere near close to a stage where it's gonna rot. There's no rot anywhere near present in its immediate life.
And this is just
it's not
basic
about
maintenance.
It's not about that. The function of the handrail is aesthetic. You know, well, it's a safety feature. It's to the homeowner. It's a visual feature. It's an accent.
Which deteriorates quicker, the clear or the stain or the paint? If you know which one, I guess just
a lot of it has to do with exposure,
okay.
And the size of that surface area that you're talking about. We can show you another rail we're going to get to that's a flat rail. Same urethane, it'll fail in 2 years if it's not maintained.
It's very, very unusual that we have to sand a paint grade top rail back to bare wood.
Yeah.
Something has to, usually there'll be rot inside it. You know, you'll find rot under the paint, rotting from the inside out before anything will manifest to make you think you need to sand it to raw wood. Very rare that we sand painted.
Yeah, at that point, if we got to go that far, it's going to be replacement now.
Gotcha.
You know, restoring is out of the question because there's nothing.
Just for like maintenance or like the aesthetic, you know, does paint fade quicker than urethane?
Well, again, color determines it.
Gotcha.
White deteriorates the slowest because it doesn't get hot. Like your dark greens, your dark reds, colors like that. This house, for example, we got to go back in the spring because it's such a big house that the south side exposure, the green is a different color than the north side now. And we brushed them the same color, but just that, you know, we've seen a fade. But as far as breakdown, cracking, any of that, no, it's bomber. It's just a matter of fading more than anything, you know.
One of the differences is the sheen on the clears it's a higher sheen. It's a shinier finish than a paint sheen. And so paint will hold organic matter, general dirtiness, and become visually unappealing sooner. We're usually repainting paint, like a white painted rail system, just because it doesn't look good.
Right.
You know, it looks dirty, and if you scrubbed on it as hard as you would have to scrub to clean it, you'd start to take more of the sheen off.
Yeah.
So we'll do a scuff sand and a fresh coat of paint in that situation.
Gotcha.
So it's a different maintenance, but it's still maintenance. At that first meeting, the discussion with the customer in any of these kind of situations, especially regarding rails or decks, but it's also the same as windows and doors and overhead doors and everything else that rots, is what do you have, what do you want? You know, this wasn't a customer, and she certainly had the financial wherewithal to have a cable rail system and a mahogany.
Whatever she wanted.
She could have whatever she wanted, but she wanted the rail that her dad built that fits the house, you know, so, and that, I mean, to us and to anybody who's handy, which is, you know, everybody in this building really knows how to run a sander and can figure out how to pull the trigger on a sprayer. If you can bring it back, unless they want something new. You know, if she had said to us, you know what, this is my entry, this is where I come in every day and my company comes in, I want to have an e-pay deck and a cable rail system. Well, we would have figured out how to make that happen because if it was what she wanted. But to us, if it's not rotten, you can bring it back. And if it fits the house and it, you know, usually budget's an issue. In this case, it wasn't. We could have done anything we wanted to, but this was the right thing for the house and it could be done, so it's what we did.